Welcome to the Climate and Coordination RCAST, where every week we'll be discussing topics related to all things climate change and RChain's role in the solution. We will be discussing technologies that can adapt and coordinate massive amounts of data like never before, forming social architectures that grow collective intelligence, sharing and evaluating data planetarily, all while maintaining personal privacy and personal data ownership. A new decentralized economy is forming as we move from the third industrial revolution, digitization, to the fourth, decarbonization. By building a co-op, built on a correct by construction, concurrent, scalable solution, RChain is structured to build out the new technology that will be required for a flourishing regenerative planet. Please join us on this journey.
Okay, welcome to this week's Climate and Coordination RCAST. We're very happy to be able to continue bringing you subjects in climate and technology and beyond that we feel are most important and most interesting to talk about. So this week there are several different topics, the first of which comes from CNBC. This is a really fascinating short article that touches on a lot of themes that we've talked about in the past on this call, but I feel that this is kind of a new angle for me. And so I learned quite a bit, and it sort of expanded my viewpoint of what's going on in the sort of larger climate story going back about 5 decades. So this piece from CNBC is titled "War Footing Needed to Correct Economists' Miscalculations on Climate Change." And this is from May 25th, written by Karen Gilchrist. And it says, the economic forecast predicting the potential impact of climate change grossly underestimate the reality and have delayed a global recovery effort. So we know that obviously we're super behind on this, but this is sort of a piece that kind of explains why, or one reason why, which I think is fascinating. It says here there's a professor called Steve Keen, who is he's a fellow at University College London's Institute for Strategy, Resilience and Security, which I think is a very interesting area to be studying right now, or to be an expert in right now. And he says that the mainstream economists deliberately and completely ignored scientific data and instead, quote, made up their own numbers to suit their market models, which is terrifying. He says a new war level footing is required to have any hope of repairing the damage. Further, he goes on to say, fundamentally, the economists have totally misrepresented the science and ignored it where it contradicts their bias that climate change is not a big deal because, in their opinion, capitalism can handle anything. And this is where I started. So I started to really think about like how economists could maybe shape public opinion. And he also talks a bit about how they're sometimes sort of the liaison between the climate scientists and the government, which I found fascinating. And the other thing that was talked about was this report. It says the representation of climate the repercussions, of climate were foretold in a 1972, talking 50 years ago now, publication called The Limits to Growth, which I really want to read. So this 1972 publication called The Limits to Growth was it says here, divisive, I'm sure, report on the destructive consequences of global expansion. But economists then and since failed to heed its warnings, preferring instead to rely on market mechanisms. Of course, says more, if their warnings had been taken seriously and we done as they suggested, changing our trajectory from 1975 on, we could have done it gradually using things like carbon taxes and so on. But the economists have delayed it by another half a century. We are, as a species, putting 3 to 4 more times of the pressure on the biosphere. So it's just sad because people sometimes, I feel, that are new to the subject of climate, it's like, why does it have to be so fast? It's like, well, because we delayed for decades and decades and decades, and now we have to make up for that time that we wasted. And that's very frustrating. So anyway, this guy, Steve Keen, seems to be really fascinating. I'm going to look him up more. And I just thought it was an interesting perspective to talk about how economists really have a part in this, to answer for. And excuse me, just how crazy it is that we really had the data back in the 70s. But obviously, maybe another reason why people didn't listen to it that much was because, unlike today, the consequences of the data weren't really being felt as much. So let's see if there's anything else I wanted to say. Yeah, I think that's about it. But anyway, I would love to hear if anybody has any comments.
Yeah. Steve Keen, he's awesome. I've been a bit of a fan of his over the years. He wrote this book called Debunking Economics, and he's like this post-Keynesian dude. And I've watched his videos, and he has a nice flowery way of talking, and he's great. I've always liked him. So it's kind of cool to see him kind of speak up here in this context. Because like these ideas, like he's right, like these ideas have been around for a good long time, and they're not ideas. These are like scientific studies have been around for a good long time. And like, I often talk about James Hansen, who, discovered a lot of this stuff way back. And all we're seeing is just affirmations of their studies. It's, it's just like, we like what Steve Keen is kind of getting at is like, we kind of don't have any excuse. We've known about this for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I just thought that was a fascinating angle, because I don't really know much about what it means to be an economist, but it makes a lot of sense to me that some of those people really just wanted to believe that this, something that we've talked about a lot, Darryl, this idea of sort of infinite growth, is going to be fine. And it's really sad, because it's super not fine. And we've talked about that sort of ignoring the externalities thing. And it's just, and Greg has also talked about, this idea that, like, the planet is a finite place. I know people don't want to believe that, but it is. So we have to deal with that and face that. And it seems like that is sort of starting to emerge as a reality that people are starting to accept, which is positive, finally. But yeah, so here's another story that I thought was fascinating. It's a little bit more of a good news story, but I saw it and I thought this was a really cool project. And I do wonder if there are going to be any blockchain implications for this. This is a press release from NASA.gov, their website, which is full of amazing and interesting information. This is from May 24th. And the press release says, new NASA Earth System Observatory to help address, mitigate climate change. So basically, I'll just read a little bit of this. It says, NASA will design a new set of Earth-focused missions to provide key information to guide efforts related to climate change, disaster mitigation, fighting forest fires, and improving a real-time agricultural processes. With the Earth System Observatory, each satellite will be uniquely designed to complement the others, working in tandem to create a 3D holistic view of Earth from bedrock to atmosphere. And then it goes on to explain basically what are the different areas of focus that this new observatory is going to include. And the first one is aerosols, answering the critical question of how aerosols affect the global energy balance, a key source of uncertainty in predicting climate change. The next area is cloud, convection, and precipitation, tackling the largest sources of uncertainty in future projections of climate change, air quality forecasting, and prediction of severe weather. The next one is called mass change, providing drought assessment and forecasting, associated planning for water use, for agriculture, as well as supporting natural hazard response. The fourth area is surface biology and geology, which is understanding climate changes that impact food and agriculture, habitation, and natural resources by answering open questions about the fluxes of carbon, water, nutrients, and energy within and beyond ecosystems, the atmosphere, the ocean, and the earth. And the fifth and final area is surface deformation and change, which is quantifying models of sea level and landscape change driven by climate change, hazard forecasts, disaster impact assessments, including dynamics of earthquakes, volcanoes, landslides, glaciers, groundwater, and Earth's interior. So it seems like they're going to really be able to provide a really much higher level of data than they ever could before. But the thing that I'm most excited about is that it seems like in several of these categories, they're really talking about either disaster prevention or disaster mitigation, which I think is going to be a huge area in the next few years. Obviously, it's already a big deal, but it seems like if they're able to help provide more time or to help provide more resources to areas that are hit with these disasters, then maybe this will help people in the mitigation efforts, because the mitigation is going to be, just basically having the resources and the data to just weather the storm and make sure that people are out of the way as much as possible. It seems like that's going to be one of the next big areas in climate. Obviously, we want to do a lot more than just try to survive what we've done, but it seems like this new Earth System Observatory is going to be a big piece in that. So that seems like a really positive development to me. So I'd love to hear anybody's thoughts about this.
Yeah, the idea of turning their, instead of looking outward to the skies, turning inward, looking back at the earth is muchly needed. I was reading the first sentence and it talks about each satellite will be uniquely designed to complement the others, working in tandem to create a 3D holistic view of Earth from bedrock to atmosphere. I just can't wait for the Oculus Quest app.
It's interesting, like I'm sure that we've probably talked about in this context how much junk there is in space and how dangerous it is because of the sort of the lack of coordination, right? Every time there are satellites fail, there's more space debris. And it's not just of all the things that you might want to have under government coordination as opposed to private coordination, it would be space. It would be satellite infrastructure. And so, I'm very encouraged that there is this direction, and it would seem like it could just expand. I mean, it would be much better to have coordinated satellite infrastructure for telecommunications, right? That would mean we don't necessarily have to have nearly as much cable going across the oceans and all kinds of stuff like that. So I'm very encouraged by this, but it is a bit late in the game. as per your previous article.
Yeah. Right. It's like we'll have a really good detailed view of the Earth burning up.
Right. Yeah. Well, there definitely is something to be said for that, because a lot of people, especially in government, they're like, okay, let's fund more research. And a lot of people, especially in the climate movement, are like, no, let's not do more research. Let's solve the problem. Like research is not what we need. And normally I would tend to agree with that because it's so obvious what's happening. And the studies have been so exhaustive for the past 50 or so years that now we're like neck deep in the effects of it, really. But the reason that I think this is different is because it seems to focus on what I said before about those mitigation efforts and, trying to predict droughts and just trying to help farmers and help people to see when certain things are coming and to provide more data. So that actually seems useful to me rather than just looking and saying, oh, look, yeah, definitely it's happening. Like, great. That's we already have been doing that for a long time.
No, but I didn't just mean
that's good. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. I wasn't saying that it's late in terms of climate, which is certainly the case, but I just meant it's late in terms of exploiting NASA's capabilities, right? NASA could have easily expanded into Starlink, right?
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Right. I mean, this is such a natural thing to do, and have and having a global telecommunications network that is run out of NASA is all kinds of advantage for the US in terms of national security, right? But it's also of great benefit to the whole planet. So it's just, again, you know, it's and the reason it's important to have some kind of governmental not control, but organization, is because the consequences of getting this wrong are just so enormous, right? You know, from space debris for all other space missions to space debris for, you know, for cities, you know, being bombarded by stuff falling out of the sky, and the list goes on and on and on. So it's a very natural thing to do, to have something like the space agency coordinating, you know, a large information gathering and telecommunication effort. This seems like a good thing. It's just, you know, I feel like we've really underutilized NASA, and I'm glad to see that we're starting to put more effort in that direction. Of all the things that you might spend money on, that seems like a really good one, especially if you have to have this giant military industrial thing. All right, I'll shut up.
No, Greg, you don't ever have to shut up. This is fascinating. But I will turn it over to Steve Ross Talbot, who I know has another topic that is very pertinent that he wanted to share. So, Steve?
Yeah, topics in the chat. So, came across this article this week. What was interesting about the publication, it was published in multiple papers. What was particularly interesting about this, the London Standard, is that the editor of the London Standard is the former Conservative Chancellor of the Exchequer. So, the guy with his hands on the money. He's no longer the Conservative Chancellor of the Exchequer, but he is the editor of the Evening Standard, so a relatively well-known conservative paper. And then they come out with pretty much a pretty grabbing headline, world at risk of hitting temperature limit in the next 5 years, scientists warn. And this is on the lead up to the climate conference in Glasgow, being hosted by the government here. And before you get seriously concerned about the title, because it does make your heart beat faster. So what they're saying is, which is not good news, it's not good news, but it's not quite as devastating as it could be, is that a new climate update warns that the odds of the world experiencing global annual temperatures that are 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels in one of the next 5 years are increasing with time. They've actually doubled. The risk is now twice as much as it was before. And the risk is 90% chance that one of the next 5 years will become the warmest, outstripping 2016. So when we talk about that, the 1.5 degree threshold is what the Paris Climate Accord was trying to hold people to. And this is very, 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 very clear evidence that we're highly likely to breach that in the next 5 years.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. But then the knock-on effects are just huge. This is what I was trying to talk about with respect to the climate migrants, right? Once you blow past 1.5 degrees Celsius, then the tropical zones start to become uninhabitable, which means you're now looking at climate migrant populations exceeding 2.8 billion people. I mean, think about that.
The walls will go up.
Yeah,
it will be as it's been described by James Lovelock in his kind of last major book. His suggestion, and I do remember hearing somebody say this, an ex-Microsoft exec who decided to go to the hills and be self-sufficient as much as possible and make sure he could use a gun. And the gun is to protect the boundary. And Lovelock's kind of saying similar things. Make sure you have the skills to survive, and surviving includes defending your land. In the meantime, there's a 60% chance that we won't hit 1.5 degrees in the next 5 years. And
but there's an extremely high chance that
humanity on the precipice of this might figure it out. And if not, then good old evolution and Gaia will figure it out for us. And we'll be dealt a hand as opposed to making the hand ourselves.
Well, this is the thing, is that like there's an extremely high chance that we're going to go past 1.5 in the next, 10 or 15 years. And if we're talking about a possibility of a coin toss, whether we get there in 5, people talking about, oh, let's start to draw down by 2030, or let's do half the emissions by 2050. It's like this is what people are talking about when it's like too slow. When it, because like, why are we talking about climate targets that are 29 years in the future when we could very well blow past our threshold for human beings being able to live near the equator in 5? I mean, like, this is like serious stuff. So I agree with you that, there's huge opportunity for humanity to step up and to do and invent, especially this is a big part of it, to invent a lot of technology that hasn't been invented yet, which we're going to absolutely need. Greta Thunberg is always talking about how we rely on that in these reports as a key component, to draw down efforts, which is risky because, of course, hasn't been invented yet. But it really pisses me off when I hear governments and different people say, oh, isn't it so great? We're going to be carbon neutral by 2050. Okay, so what happens between now and then? Like, there's no plan to get down. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like a lot of projects and governments just say, oh, well, we're going to solve it by then. But there are no targets between now and then. There's no like accountability. There's no roadmap. And it completely ignores the fact of what you just brought up, Steve, about like, we could really go past the threshold very, very quickly. So I think that just really needs to be addressed by people. And I'm glad that you brought up the story, because I want people to understand that it's really urgent, Yeah,
I mean, I don't think, in my bizarre way that I look at the world, there's no guarantee that we will be the longest reigning species on the planet. In fact, there's every suggestion that we won't be, even if we manage to deal with climate change. Because absolutely. At some point, the sun gets too hot, we all die off anyway, whatever. And unless we adapt and become a completely different form of elements. And maybe that's where AI comes in the future, that we'll have our brains red and we become a piece of silicon. Who knows? Fortunately, I won't be around by then. But there's no guarantee that we survive. It may not be the intent. It's a bit like The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, if you've ever watched that or read the book. Because the Earth is just a giant computer aimed at answering the greatest question of all. And the answer turns out to be 42. Right? And we're just part of the computer. In fact, the dolphins are more important than us in the computer. And it might be that that's kind of our fate. If we get through this, I think that there is a good chance then, only then, that having effectively understood how to regulate our climate, right, in natural ways, but also invented ways, that from there, that's the stepping stone. That's the stepping stone to interstellar travel. Because until you can control your own environment, until you can't control the sun. And when you can control the sun and harvest most of the energy that you need directly from the sun, and not through solar panels, but by much more ambitious means, only then do you have the technological wizardry needed to perhaps deal with interstellar space. So this is a good test. Whether we survive it is another matter.
Yeah, there's that theory. There was like some solar system that astronomers discovered that it appeared as if there could have been, it was just like a wild theory, but it appeared as if the way that the sun was in that solar system was reflecting back to Earth, it almost looked as if it had been harnessed, or like a net had been placed around it by some advanced civilization to kind of like harness its power or something.
Yeah, it is that sort of science fiction-y thing too.
Right.
You know, I mean, they say in those circles and in you know, cosmology and what have you, that you know, the first step is being able to leave your planet, right? Perhaps, and then perhaps the second step is then understanding how nuclear reactions work and being able to control those. And then it's like nuclear fission, right? And then it's kind of like your environment. And then it's the sun. And then it's interstellar. And the equation that governs the likelihood of life in the universe includes all of these aspects, because in discovering how to deal with atomic structures, some civilizations, if there are parallel civilizations in other universes or in the multiverse, whatever, might discover it and blow themselves up. Some might not figure out how to deal with their own climate and environment, and essentially, without meaning to, build themselves out of existence. Don't know which one we are.
Well, I don't know if you saw recently, but I posted a picture of this rooster that I took, you know, because the chickens roam freely on the island of Kauai. So I took this picture of the rooster and I posted. So I wonder if this is always the end game for every form of dinosaur.
The chicken is the closest living relative to the Tyrannosaurus Rex. That's why they look so prehistoric.
So that was why I was posting it. It was exactly that.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't want to sound like a conspiracy nut, but I do think that there's a profound connection between the time that we're in and the Congress and the Pentagon finally getting their act together and starting to publish what we know about technology that's way beyond ours actually being on the planet, right? So I don't know if any of you have seen the videos that Commander David Fravor took, but they are astonishing. So there are clearly civilizations now, whether they're earthbound or in our solar system or from somewhere else, but they're clearly civilizations that have technology so far beyond what we've done that it's, you know, it's mind numbing. They completely overcome the laws of inertia. Right, so these things can travel at hypersonic speeds and turn on a dime, right? So in with our technology, that would turn the occupants inside into a pulp. In fact, there's a lovely there's a British physicist who did the physics of Iron Man. And so he was asking whether or not, you know, what were the things that Iron Man could and couldn't do that were in alignment with what we know about physics. And you know, so for Iron Man 2, he gives it a thumbs up with the exception of one moment, and it's all about inertia. So when Iron Man stops the missile with his body armor, he would have been turned into a pulp. But other than that, everything else we could do. But you know, we haven't figured out how to get around inertia yet. And the interesting thing is that, you know, we have videos, infrared and photographic, you know, on film of technology that completely overcomes inertia. So this is quite interesting developments. So but maybe they won't talk to us until we get our act together climate wise. They're waiting to check and see. Well, no, they're too savage to enter the Galactic Federation because they can't even, you know, save themselves.
Right.
Or maybe they're just waiting for us to kind of ripen to the point where there's just enough of us on the planet where we're about to destroy it, and then they'll harvest us.
Indeed, indeed.
Sounds great.
So, do we have any other articles?
Well, I actually just wanted to add one thing to that, and then I think Darryl has one that he wanted to share. But I think it's also in terms of, like sort of cosmic, galactic, geologic level time coincidences. One that really freaks me out is the idea that like we're destroying the planet. We find out that we're destroying the planet, and we learn that we can leave it at basically the same time. And then now we're like on the precipice of completely destroying the planet. And we're also on the precipice of like possibly being able to send humans to live on another surface. Like at the exact same time. That's a little trickier
though. That's it won't be, I don't think, because as much as I like Elon Musk for his sheer audacity at times, and he has made me smile with much of what he's done with SpaceX. That's just getting a rocket to Mars with like 5 people in it, right? Getting an entire population to Mars, our nearest planet, and putting Mars into a state, infrastructure-wise, to be able to support those people is a long way off. And even if it was possible in the next 50 years, right? The number of people that would be going would be less than in the famous film called 2012, when the Earth changes its shape, and you know the one I mean. Right?
I've actually just recently
and
watched
then there's
these
arcs built. Yeah, so it'd be less people than that.
Well, for sure.
Because,
I just think on a geologic time scale, it is weird that we're working on both of these things at the same time. Because think about the billions of years of evolution and the forming of our planet and all this stuff that had to align. And now finally, these are like 2 of our most contested challenges, controversial challenges. And I just think that's fascinating.
I mean, if you think about us taming our climate, which also means to learn not to consume certain things and not to emit certain things, right? So it's not just some magical bit of tech that does stuff. It's also about changing our behaviors. But it will give us a deeper understanding of climate science. And if we have a deeper understanding of climate science, then it becomes more feasible to look long-term to what would be required to change the Martian atmosphere. So you're absolutely right in a sense, they run hand in hand. One actually informs the aspirations of the other. And so the immediate challenge that we face informs those aspirations. It's not a case of figuring it out and then just figuring it out theoretically. It's figuring it out and doing it. Because if you haven't actually done it, you have no hope of making it happen on Mars. So you kind of really got to not just solve it on paper and solve people's behavioral issues. You actually have to do it. And when we come out of that, then.
Well, I mean, that's only a glimmer of a hope, right? Because I mean, Earth is full of, an ecological cycle that will continue without us, right? The technology here is phenomenal. Another picture I took on Kauai was just of these enormous beans that were growing on some vine. They were like, bigger than fava beans. They were huge, and they were gorgeous. They were black and white, speckled. And the comment that I made was, pod technology, right? It's very sophisticated pod technology. Imagine, digging a hole and throwing your phone in it and seeing a phone, seeing it sprout and watching a phone-bearing vine grow. We don't have anything like that. Like none of our technology is self-regenerating. Right? Think about that. Nature does it like, it's just like, so natural, right? It's like, of course, this is how it's done. But we don't have any technology that is self-regenerating.
We've barely got to the point of having systems that we might consider on a superficial level as autonomic. And I think it was Paul or Peter Hall of IBM that used that phrase autonomic computing. And that was used, I don't know, 20 years ago? Certainly 15.
Yeah. Well, we've certainly got a long way to go, both on the inward and the outward. But Darryl, maybe you want to share the story you wanted to bring up, because I think it's fascinating and really important.
Yeah, I mean, one other thing I was just going to add to that is the research that Elon Musk is doing. He should probably also pour a bit of research into the psychological damage that will occur in any kind of like small group of really rich people that end up on Mars. It's great, you've arrived, but you're going to be dealing with some seriously depressed people. And, so it's like, learning about how to be happy is another big part.
Yeah, seriously. That is so true.
So the stuff that I was going to bring up is related to another news event that occurred this week. It has to do with big oil. So in Salon, there's an article that's headlined "Climate Tipping Point: ExxonMobil's Shareholder Revolt and the End of the Line for Fossil Fuels." And then the subtitle, "ExxonMobil Shareholders Fight Back in a Stunning Week That Makes Clear the Market for Fossil Fuels is Winding Down." And I'll just kind of read the first three paragraphs. Few days spell out the future as clearly as this Wednesday did in terms of energy and climate action. The dikes of denial behind which big carbon has sheltered their deadly oil, coal, and fossil fuel gas were breached, not once or twice, but 3 times, and are now irreversibly crumbling. Chevron shareholders rebuked the oil company's refusal to commit to reduce climate emissions from its production and sale of oil and gas. A Dutch court told Shell, which had already made such a commitment, but an inadequate one, pledging a 20% reduction by 2030, that in fact its emissions impact had to be cut by 45% in that same 9-year span and placed in compliance with the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming limit called for by the Paris Agreement. But in the biggest headline grabber of all, ExxonMobil shareholders rejected at least 2 and perhaps 3 of the company's board candidates. Instead, they elected anti-management candidates offered by a tiny hedge fund called Engine Company Number 1, which attacked Exxon's climate denial as a business folly that is leading the company towards bankruptcy. One key to the shocking defeat of Exxon's board slate was the decision by its second largest investor, BlackRock, to vote against 3 of the 4 challenged Exxon board members. And then it goes on, but it's kind of interesting how the market is now speaking, and the market is saying, literally the shareholders of these companies are saying, you have to rebrand, you have to redo what you're doing, because it is not good business. So I think that's a very encouraging sign. We can't just rely on governments. And so it's nice to know that that the market, I'm certainly no free market evangelist, but it's nice to know that the market is speaking.
Yeah. And well, it's just amazing because that day there were huge blows dealt to Shell, Exxon, and also Chevron all in the same day. And, this is not some little side story about climate. This was a main story on Rachel Maddow on MSNBC. And she interviewed somebody about it, but I can't remember which climate activist it was, but it was a very famous man, and I can't remember his name right now, but that's okay. But yeah, they're reporting on this, in major ways. So it's exciting, but of course it's still words. So we still need to see what the actual actions are that are taken, but it's very exciting. I mean, we could see the end of oil as we know it very soon. We've kind of skidded on that a few times in the past year, but it seems like it could really happen.
Well, yeah, because it seems like these mega oil companies are now facing the reality that they literally have to change their entire business model. Like there's another article here from France. France's Total. After a week of setbacks for big oil, France's Total wins support for its climate strategy. Okay, so investors in Total backed the company's climate strategy on Friday, according to Chairman and CEO Patrick Poyan. Total shareholders also voted overwhelmingly in favor of rebranding the company to Total Energies, as the company seeks to reflect a shift in focus to renewable energy. So if an oil company wants to survive, what they have to do now is get out of oil and get into renewables.
Yeah, this is the end of the line for some of these people. I don't know what else we can really say, but what are they going to do? I mean, they're going to have to either really pivot and radically restructure the way they do business, or they're going to go under. So it's great. It's really exciting. Bill McKibben, that's who was on Rachel Maddow the other night. Bill McKibben.
Oh yeah, he's awesome.
So it was cool, to see this being reported in a very mainstream way. I mean, climate is not often talked about on these huge news shows with millions of viewers. It's usually talked about, in non-prime time slots. But this was great because I think it brings a lot of attention to how deeply in trouble the oil industry is. And that in itself provides social proof for more people to get inspired, because they're like, oh my God, it's crumbling. And so I think there's a sort of social factor, social proof of the more people that know what's really going on, maybe it will energize more people around the issue.
It's funny you said about the news coverage. As we've gone through this COVID journey, I don't know what TV's been like for you guys, but here in the UK, the main broadcasters, so the independent television network, the BBC, and all of the other main channels, every news broadcast, right? The midday news, the 1 o'clock news, the 6 o'clock news, the 10 o'clock news, the main news programs every day has reported on the number of people infected, the number of deaths, how many died in hospital, all of that. Every day. Surely that's what we should be doing with climate. That there should be a news segment on every news program saying, this is where we are today. This is where we are today. But they don't. Maybe you should all write to our local news companies and say, you really should consider doing this.
Well, the carbon budget is definitely dwindling fast. And that would be at least one figure that would be very easy to explain to people.
What I really want is I want a blockchain-based journalism solution. If I weren't so strapped with RChain, I would probably launch myself. Just crowd.
Well, you're not that busy, Greg. I mean, shouldn't be any problem.
Crowdsourced, crowd vetted journalism on the blockchain, where you can start to. I mean, one of the things that is so difficult is that the internet kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater in terms of the vetting of stories. We have all kinds of just craziness and trying to get to the bottom of what's accurate, what has credibility is so difficult. But if you could just focus on telling stories like the climate story, which is not really being told, and do it in such a way that it's very, very difficult for people to refute the stories that you're telling, I think that would be a very good beginning for blockchain-based journalism.
Well, Double Down News might be a good organization to approach. George Monbiot writes for them, many others do too. And if I'm going to make videos. Absolutely. So I'm going to make a connection here that when we've sorted out the Arnold family photo, Eve Arnold, library of photos, and can wrap that with NFTs, essentially promoting things onto the chain from your local disk, having them authenticated. That's similar to the process of writing copy, and then having it checked by the editor before it's finalized and then published. So the very same platform potentially that we're building for the Arnold family could be used with an organization like Double Down News. And then what we'd be doing is developing, we might choose then, and maybe this is an RChain thing for members, we might choose then specifically for RChain, the co-op and its members to sponsor a climate channel.
Yeah, exactly.
With that software,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, once we've got the Arnold thing going, then we can certainly do that, I think. And certainly do it with the text versions of stories, if not the videos. I mean, the videos will require a bit more work to do streaming, but even that's possible.
Oh yeah, and this is why I was so encouraged that Chronogram approached us independently, right? So one of their founders joined as a member a couple of weeks ago, a month ago, and then we had a good meeting last Friday, I think it was, or maybe it was Monday. Yeah, it was Monday, and they are quite interested. And what was really interesting to me was not just that they see the publication on the blockchain as of value. They also see distributed decentralized governance as of significant value. So they want to have the governance of their company be on chain, which I think is just phenomenal, right? That is so much a step in the right direction. So you know, as challenging as a lot of the stories are that, you know, we've heard today, I'm also very impressed by the number of people who, you know, are trying to move in the right direction. Because I don't believe that we can. If you look at the track record of companies like Exxon and Shell, it mimics and mirrors what the tobacco companies did. Like with the tobacco companies knowingly perpetrated a lie that killed millions and millions of people.
Yeah, but it's even worse with this now, because when somebody else dies, excuse me, from smoking, that's a tragedy, but it doesn't imperil the entire underlying composition of Earth.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. I completely agree that it's worse. However, my point is, just because their bottom line is forcing them to move into a different direction, it doesn't mean that their value systems will result in good solutions for the planet. Right? What we've seen is over and over and over again, over a very long period of time, they continue to cut corners and perpetrate lies and do whatever they could to fatten the pockets of certain communities, and at the expense of the entire planet. So now that the writing is on the wall, we think that they're just going to suddenly adopt value systems that are for the good for all. No, that seems extremely unlikely. We cannot bet our future on that. We have to bet our future on being able to usher in new value systems.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
It's the behavior side. You know, we have to change behaviors, and how do you do that? You create a different value system.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is why a lot of people, even when they do see certain companies like BP, which, you know, has advertisements about certain types of new, you know, energy investments they're making, this is why a lot of people don't trust them, and they just think it's another trick, you know, and time will tell, you know.
Yeah, but the thing is, we have to roll up our sleeves and create alternatives. We can't just sit on our thumbs and say, okay, well, they've finally got the message, they're going to turn around now. No way.
For sure. Yeah.
The invisible hand will take care of us. We just allow the market.
Yeah,
It's
the
the
invisible hand is going to magically resettle 2 billion people off of the equator. It'll be effortless. Great.
That's right. No, it's the aliens, right? They're gonna come to our rescue at the last possible moment.
I mean, yeah, pick your savior. But it's not looking good, you know. Yeah, so there's going to be a lot of work to do. Well, we have a few minutes left. Are there any
Have
other
we
final
reached
comments?
a point where, yeah, do you think we've reached a point where an organization like the East, if you've ever seen that film, will take hold and start to hold some of the executives of these companies personally responsible in a rather graphic way?
No, I think that happens when you get sort of that happens when you get kind of the level of tragedy that an entire generation is marred. Right now, it's not enough to have, we don't have like an entire generation going, I know that things will never be the same. But when that happens, then you can rest assured that there will be some population within that large of a sample of humanity that will seek for justice and retribution as opposed to problem solving.
So we're not quite there yet.
Not yet, in my opinion. I mean, you do have organizations like who are like Earth First and organizations like that who are on the edge of that kind of behavior.
Yeah, I mean, it's disruption, Extinction Rebellion practice it. So it's just working towards it, I guess. Not quite there yet.
Yeah, I prefer to focus my energy on finding the alternative. I mean, I can see the value of it. That's not really where I'm going to put my energy.
Well, it'll be inevitable unless certain things happen.
Yeah,
I think that's I'm looking at it as a marker in the future, because it would suggest that the dial has gone very far the wrong way when you see that behavior.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, the one practical advantage is a lot of these folks do sit on capital resources that would have enormous benefit to folks who are working on practical solutions. So if it's not so much about justice, but as a part of the solution, the people who are sitting on these ill-gotten gains are relieved of the burden of managing those gains. Then that could have a positive effect on resourcing the solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a positive note to end on. Thank you all for a great conversation. Every week, I feel like I learn a lot, and I hope that people who are listening learn a lot too. So we'll see you all hopefully next week. And for anybody listening, please make sure that you are subscribed to RChain on YouTube and following RChain on Twitter. And we'll see you again soon.
Indeed. Thanks to all. Ciao.
Bye.
bye everybody.